This week, I'm going to be critiquing some of the photographs that you guys sent in to me. As this is a channel where I show you how to get better as a photographer, it's only fair that I start doing photo critiques with you guys and with the photos that you've sent in. I find that not only do I learn when someone else is critiquing my photos, I learn when I'm critiquing other people's photos and also when I'm watching other people's photos being critiqued. So it really is a win-win for everyone. First of all, thank you all for sending in your photos. I originally said I was going to just critique 10 of them, but I'll see how many I can get through. All of you have been fantastic in sending them in, and there were so many to go through. And thinking about it, if I went through them all, this video would probably be about 10 hours long. So if I haven't used your image this time, please don't take it to heart. And please do send one in next time, or maybe send in another image next time. Now, to critique photographs, you don't need to be the best photographer in the world, and as long as you understand how photography works and what makes up a good photo, and kind of have an opinion, it can be a fun process. And also, if you think differently to me, that's fine. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And in the comments, please try not to be cruel. You can be critical about other people's photos without being a d***. Now, if I'm critiquing your photo, there are a few things to take into consideration. If you want to skip these and go straight to the meat of this video, go to this time code. So if I am critiquing your photo, or if anyone's critiquing your photos, the best thing is to not take it personally. Anything I say about your photo is meant in the kindest way, to try and help you become a better photographer. And remember, they're comments about your photo, not about you. The second point is that these are my opinions on these photos, and if you disagree, that's fine. Different people might have different opinions about different things, and that's one part of being human. After all, if we all thought exactly the same, it would be a pretty boring world. The third point is that I'll just use your first name so you have a little bit of anonymity. The fourth point is that this is just feedback on your photo, and you can do with it what you will. I always try to get people to critique my work, as I find I can really learn some valuable things from it when I take it on a purely logical basis. Point 5 is that I'm here to help you get better as a photographer, not to mollycoddle you. Having your photos critiqued is one of the best ways to learn about your own photography and where you can improve. Point 6, critiquing is all about seeing something from a third-party point of view. Sometimes it can change your whole way of thinking and get you out of a learning rut that you might be stuck in. Point 7, if you're particularly fragile, this probably isn't for you. I've had emails of people in the past where they were offended when some random person on some random Facebook page commented on their photos, and the person was only trying to give some feedback. Always think, what can I learn from this? And what positives can I take from this advice? And lastly, thank you all for being such good sports and sending in your photos. This should be a lot of fun, and if this works and you guys like it, I might even do this live next time. That is, once I have a computer that can handle the amount of work that this is, because my Mac is really on its last legs. As I've said, you guys sent in so many photos, so I'm going to go through as many as possible. The first one we have is from Matt, and it's an astrophotography shot, and it's either a self-portrait or it's of one of his friends. Now, this is taken on an A7 Mark II with a 20mm f1.4. I think that's the Sony Art lens. Yeah, Sony Art. I'll pull this out a little bit. His settings were ISO 3200 at 20mm, f1.4 at 25 seconds. So it's a nice composition. You've got the person standing to the left on the rule of thirds that comes down here, and then you've got the Milky Way cutting through the shot. The core is on the horizon, and there's a bit of light pollution on the horizon by the person. But this is quite good because that brighter part of the horizon kind of draws your eye to that point where that person is. So it kind of pulls your eye to that person. If we zoom in, so the first thing I always look at when I'm looking at astrophotography shots are the corners of those shots. When you shoot wide open on certain lenses, you'll get coma aberrations, and you can see these here. So if we look at these stars, they're all kind of elongated a little bit, and they're concentric around the center of the lens. So if we go over to the other corner, they're elongated the other way. So one piece of advice I'd give you, Matt, is to maybe stop the lens down a little bit. maybe stop it down to f2. You might have to bump your ISO up a little bit, but that would be a way of stopping these kind of aberrations in the corner. In saying that, if you're looking at the image on screen, you can't really notice those. A lot of people kind of pick on these little things on the photos, but if you're only showing it online, or if it's only something that's going to stay online, you're not going to see these. If you were to blow this image up and show it on your wall, you would really start to see those elongated stars. So that's all the advice I'd give you with using that lens when shooting astrophotography, is to maybe stop it down a bit. And I bet if you stopped it down to f2, which is still a lot of light coming into your camera, you'd probably get rid of most of those. Now, as for the person, that person must have stood still for such a long time. I've done shots like this where I've kind of done it as a self-portrait, where I've gone out into the shot, and after about 8 to 10 seconds, I started blurring a lot more. This person's really good at standing still. The other bit of advice I'd give you is to maybe get that person to put the camera on the floor or leave it on a bag somewhere, because that blurry bit of the camera kind of draws your eye a little bit away, and you can clearly see that he's a photographer. With the Milky Way, there is a little bit of purple in this Milky Way, so I'd probably watch how much you process that Milky Way. Normally there's more yellows and browns in the Milky Way when you go to like a Bortle 1 or a Bortle 2 level. I'm guessing this is probably Bortle 3, maybe Bortle 4, with this light pollution on the horizon. Also, it looks like there's some light catching the grass, so I'm guessing there's more light pollution behind where you took this photograph as well. When it comes to astrophotography shots, there's so many different ways you can edit the sky as well. In this one, you've made it quite blue, and I kind of like that in the shot. So with this, I'd just watch those magenta colors in the Milky Way, and maybe I'd pull them down on the HSL sliders. I'm not going to try it on this because it's a JPEG image, but with the raw file, you should be able to pull those colors out of it a little bit. Normally there's yellows and browns in the Milky Way more than purples and magentas. So that's one thing I'd watch, is just watch your color in the Milky Way. Overall though, it's a really nice shot. The guy stood so still. You've controlled that light pollution in the background, and you've got a nice capture of the Milky Way. I really like this next shot from Patrick. It's using geometrical shapes and those repeating patterns of that shape. And it was taken, what we got? So this was taken with the RX10 Mark IV, and what was the focal length? So it had a full frame focal length equivalent of 107 millimeters. So this would be like an A7 III at the end of a 24 to 105 lens. It's fantastic though, you've got these triangles and they're just repeating and repeating and repeating. It really does draw your eye down this kind of corridor. The only thing I'd say is where this corner is nipped off, it's just a shame you couldn't be a little bit further back and you had that corner in. But I'm guessing your back was probably against the wall, or there was some restriction for that. So this is that kind of edge patrol that people talk about, as you kind of watch your edges. If that corner was in, just like it is here, that would make this photo that's already good even better. Now, I don't know whether you dropped the saturation or whether it was just a kind of a monotone shot anyway. It's really accentuated the kind of contrast of the shot. And that's the thing with black and white shots. They need to accentuate that contrast, and they need to sort of have lots of differences in that contrast to make them really stand out. This is definitely one of them. The next shot is by Arridge, and by the time it's 7:13 in the morning, so yeah, this is a shot of a sunrise. I love it when this happens, when that sun is just poking in and comes up underneath that cloud and catches the bottom of the cloud. It can produce some fantastic skies. This sky is fantastic. However, it does look like you've just stepped out of your house, you saw this sky and took a photo of it. That's the thing with skies like this, they come and go very quickly, and also you could get a forecast that you don't think that this is going to happen with, and all of a sudden it does it in the morning. The one thing with things like this is to get to a nice landscape, so you have a really nice landscape to complement that sky. It is the hardest thing, because so many times you'll see a sky like this and you'll just be going to work, or you'll have just woken up and opened the curtains or anything like that. And that's why with landscape photography, it's about going to those locations time and time again until you get a sky like this above a really nice landscape. Also, if I look at the metadata, you've taken this with the iPhone 7 Plus. It's amazing the details we can get out of camera phones nowadays. So all I'd say with this one is get yourself to those really pretty locations whenever you can and keep going back to them. Then there'll be that one day where the sky will do this and you'll get a really nice landscape underneath it. This next one is from Bruce. Thanks for sending the photo in, Bruce. This is of a lighthouse and I'm not sure where that is. I don't recognize it. One thing I would say is that it looks a little bit over-processed. There's a bit of a halo around the lighthouse and the lighthouse is looking quite blue. Normally, that lighthouse needs to look white. So what I'm guessing is you probably brought down, what was it? The gradient tool maybe over that. One thing I would say is if you want to do this, you need to mask off the sky in Photoshop, or there is a function in Lightroom. Where is it? Let me go to the gradient tool. It's the range mask. The range mask would normally cut around that lighthouse quite well. One other thing I think that mask has done is darken down that lighthouse. So you want the lighthouse to be the brightest part because that lighthouse is the subject. So if that was the brightest part in the shot, it would really draw your eye to it. So if I bring up the navigator on the left-hand side, if you look around that, you can see that halo around it. And that is indicative of the photo being over-processed a little bit. So what you want to do is just bring that processing back a little bit. The sky is quite bright, and it's a shame you didn't get more gaps in the clouds on the horizon. Then you'd have probably got the sunlight behind it, because it does look like the sun's behind it. And what time was it? So it's 6:30 in the evening, so it was obviously a sunset. Another thing you could do, I'm just looking around the photo, and another thing you could probably do is maybe if there's a path down here, maybe walk around and use the path as leading lines towards the lighthouse. Then you'd have the lighthouse to one side from a slightly different angle, and then the sun to one side. The problem with this one is if the sun breaks out, it would either be behind the lighthouse and it would turn it into a silhouette, or it would just overpower the whole shot. And you would have to drop your exposure quite a bit. If you came along where that path is going in and try and use that as some leading lines into the shot and leading lines to the lighthouse, if the sun came out and it was at 45 degrees, that would then sidelight the lighthouse and then you'd have a really nice shot. And that lighthouse would be brighter in the shot. But like I said, all depends on the location. From the looks of it, there's a village in the background, so that might not be the best solution. It's hard to tell by looking at the photo, but I'd try a few different locations and I'd try a few different spots. So you use the sun to your advantage and use that sunlight to your advantage. Instead of having to put that gradient tool on and control the brightness of the sky, you want that lighthouse to stand out. You want the lighthouse to be a bit brighter than everything else surrounding it. I've just overlaid it with the rule of thirds, and you have followed that rule really well. You've got your horizon on the bottom third, and then you've got that lighthouse on the left-hand side third as well. So you are following those rule of thirds well. And that kind of does show in this image. So if you can get to this location again, have a walk around the lighthouse and really explore this subject and see if there's any other angles that you could take it from where the lighthouse would really stand out. Like I've already said, maybe using that path as a leading line, or even going down to the left, maybe going around there so you've got it lit from the left-hand side. So there's so many different things you can do with one subject and so many different angles that you can kind of take of that subject. Now this next one's by Gito, and if I've pronounced your name wrong, I'm really sorry about that. This is really nice, and it's a father and son by the looks of it. They're just chilling out on the side of the road. The exposure's really nice, and the light is really nice as well. I'm guessing by the looks of it in the background, it was a cloudy day. It gives a nice soft light, and it's lit their faces really well. And by the look of the road, it's probably quite a dark road, and it's giving darkness to their cheeks and darkness to the sides of their faces as well. So it's almost like a big softbox shining down on their faces. So a really nice exposure, a really nice shot of their faces. This shows how good cloudy days are when you're taking photographs of people. Now, one thing I would change in this is the crop. See, you've got this white wall in the background and you've got this telegraph pole. It's not really adding anything to the photo. It's kind of taking away from the photo a little bit. So if I was to take this one I'd have probably gone closer to them, or I would have used a longer focal length. So if I just get the crop tool, I pull it in a little bit and get rid of that white wall in the background, if I was to crop it there, that's a more compelling photo. So straight away you can see the brightest parts of the image are this guy's hands and their faces. So you're drawn to their faces, and that's the thing. When you look at photos, you're drawn to faces. Instead of cropping in on it like this, next time you get a chance to take a photo like this, walk closer to them and try and frame up and actually do that edge patrol. Look around your shot and look to see what you don't need in the shot. If you got rid of that white wall and you framed it up like this, it'd be a much more compelling shot. But I really like this one. It's got a lot of character, and it's just like it's a father and son. Are they waiting for the bus? Are they working? You know, there's bits of wood chopped in the background. Are they just taking a break from work? You never know. So it is a really nice shot, and they do show character, and just the way they're kind of looking at you, it's a really nice shot. I like it. Looking at the data, you can tell you shot this with a manual lens because the focal length and the aperture is missing. ISO 160 and 1/250th of a second. Shot it with an A7 Mark III. Now looking at it, it's probably quite a wide angle lens, maybe a 24mm. I could be wrong. There's a bit of distortion in it, but I'm guessing it's a 24mm. Let me know in the comments below whether I'm right or wrong. I could be completely wrong, but I'm guessing a 24mm. But if you could get closer, this is where a 50mm really comes into play. If you got the 50mm and got closer, or even with that 24, if you walked closer, again, like that crop that I showed you, get rid of that white wall in the background, get rid of the telegraph pole, and get rid of that sky, and it'll make the shot a lot more compelling. But you've got a really nice exposure, exposed their faces perfectly. This next shot by Julian is of a cityscape, really nicely framed. You've got this big tall tower in the background. Not sure if that's Toronto or Auckland. There's so many cities with spikes like this in it. Let me know in the comments below which city this is, because yeah, it'd be interesting to know. It's a really nice shot. You've got lots of bright, vibrant colors in the shot, and with that long exposure of 274 seconds, which is 5 minutes, or just under 5 minutes, it's really smoothed out the water. It's really blurred the bright lights that are reflected from the city. Also with the f/16, this is a prime example of where you can use smaller apertures to give those starbursts to any pinpoint lights. Because if I go close in here, you look at these lights here and they've all burst out. Any pinpoint lights will do this when you use a smaller aperture. So when you're f11 to f16, you get really nice starbursts, and Julian has really captured that nicely. The only thing I'd say with this one is to watch your highlights. So on the spire in the background, it looks like it's overexposed just a touch. We can see that just up here. And then down here on what looks like a walkway maybe, or some shops, that looks quite overexposed as well. But that's the thing with cityscapes. It's really hard to control those bright areas as well as getting a good exposure in the shadows. And there's one other thing I wanted to check as well. So see, the spire in the middle is just off that center line. If you can get that perfectly on that center line, that would make this shot even better. Now there may have been something just to the right of this frame where you had to push it across a little bit, but that's where you could kind of zoom in a little bit or just crop in a little bit afterwards. But in getting that spire bang in the center, so let's say there, it makes it almost symmetrical. And with all of these reflections on the water, it almost creates that V, and then the V of the city. So it makes it perfectly symmetrical. So that's the only thing I'd say. Watch your highlights, and then anything tall or anything that's really pronounced out of the cityscape, try and get it bang in the center, or try and get it on one of those thirds. But with this orientation, try and get it in the center. This next shot is from Jur, and I apologize if I've mispronounced your name. This is a really minimal shot, and there's lots of kind of negative space in it. Obviously the subject is the person walking their dog in the distance, and it looks like they're walking the dog over a set of sand dunes. This really gives a sense of that moody sky and a moody shot, or like a stormy evening. It is a shame that the ripples on the dunes weren't kind of pointing towards the dog walker, or if they'd have arced around a little bit towards the dog walker, but that's obviously something you can't change. One thing I would say is, what have you shot it on? So you've shot it on the Nikon Z7, and the lens is the Nikon Z50 f1.8, 1/25th of a second, f11, ISO 64. Now if I zoom in on the person, they're not quite in focus. So that would be one thing I'd check. If you get a shot like this, check your focus, because you can see that person's just a touch blurry. Doesn't matter so much when you're looking at the image as a whole like this, but again, if you were to blow this up onto a wall and have a big print of it, you'd really see that blurriness. So just keep an eye on your focus. One other thing is, I'm guessing that you may have planned this shot, but I'm thinking that that person was just walking their dog and you saw this, got your camera out, took it really quickly. If your camera does have that touchscreen to focus, touch on that person, take the shot, and then check it quickly before they've walked over the brow of the hill or over the brow of what looks like a sand dune. But this does show how you can have very little in your shot, and it can be quite a dramatic, impactful shot. This next shot by Alex is another astrophotography shot. It does look like there's some light pollution coming from over your left-hand shoulder, which is lighting these trees and this building. You've got the core in the shot as well, so that's nice. If we look at the stats, you've used a focal length of 14 millimeters, nice wide-angled Samyang lens. I had this until I smashed my lens, so it's a really good lens, really wide, takes in loads into the shot. It is distorting that building a bit, so you can see the two walls of that building leaning in, but then with that wide angle you do get much more of the sky in. One thing I would say is the sky does look a bit patchy, so keep an eye on how you're processing it and what tools you're using to process it, because the sky is really dark here, but then there's a patch here that's really bright, and then this part of the Milky Way is dark, then this is brighter again. This brightness on the horizon is fine because that's almost showing that there's a bit of light pollution about. There might be a city on the horizon or anything like that. But the way it then goes dark into this part of the Milky Way and then bright again, the Milky Way is more even than that. So just keep an eye on what you're doing with the sky and with the Milky Way. I'd say the processing that you've put on the Milky Way here, try putting that on all of the sky, just to see if it looks any better, because it looks a bit strange where there's this big dark patch. Now the other thing you could do, be quite hard with this one because this tree is so detailed, is to mask off the sky, and then the processing that you put just on the core of the Milky Way, put that on all of the sky, just to see how different you can get it looking. You want the sky to be quite even, and then you want that strip of the Milky Way to be brighter coming through the shot. With your settings, you've used 6 seconds, f3.2, and ISO 3200. So you did have to bump that ISO up, but I'd say what you probably could have done with this is drop that ISO down and raise that shutter speed up a bit, so you're maybe going 12 or 13 seconds. When you're just viewing the image like this with that lens and with the A7 Mark III, you could, in theory, shoot with 30 seconds, but that's following the 500 rule. If you're following the NPF rule, I think I've got it on my phone on PhotoPills, it's 9.34 seconds. So you're well within that. So you could almost take your shutter speed up to 10 seconds, almost doubling your exposure time. So that would let in a lot more light. And then you could almost drop your ISO down to half, so down to 1600. The other way to do it would be to maybe take a shot of the building. So you use these settings to get a good shot of the building and that tree, and then lengthen that shutter speed to then get a shot of the sky. So you're almost overexposing the building and the tree a little bit, and getting a good exposure of the sky, and then you blend those two together. Then you'll have a lot more detail in the sky to work with. One last thing, with the building and the tree, they're quite yellow. So you almost want to control those. If you use the HSL slider, you could control that a little bit. No, it's hue, I don't want that, I want saturation. So straight away, I've just dropped the saturation in the HSL sliders, and it's made that building and that tree look a bit more natural. So control the colors and see how you can sort of pull those colors back or push them up a little bit. The only downside to doing this is it's dropped the colors in all of the yellows, so it's lost a bit of yellow in the Milky Way as well. However, if you did that double shot, so you had a shot of the building and the tree, and then you had a longer exposure for the sky, you could edit them separately and then blend them together in Photoshop afterwards. This next shot is by David. I know this location. I used to live near here when I was living back in the UK. I used to live in Poole. And this is the bay behind Durdle Door. So Durdle Door is just to the right. Really nice location. This whole coastline is fantastic for photography. I like how you've got this path coming down into the shot, kind of leads your eye down into it. And this arcing of this bay and that rocky outcrop that cuts through the bay. It's just a really cool location. One thing I would say is I think this is in the evening or afternoon. The sun looks like it's coming and going, and it looks like Durdle Door is casting a bit of a shadow on this part of the bay. One thing I would say is try coming back to this location first thing in the morning and get that first light, because you can get the sun rising just over here, just past these cliffs. And that does cast some really nice light into this bay if you get it the right time of year. I would say with this one, if you just increase the saturation a little bit, it would give a lot more life to the photo. So I'll do that with vibrance, not saturation. I'll actually give a little bit on both. And then increase the contrast a bit as well. Probably a bit too much saturation. So straight away, I've increased the saturation and vibrance a little bit, and it does make it pop a little bit more. But when the clouds are blocking the sun a little bit, or it's giving a kind of a muted look to the sunlight, you can use that vibrance and saturation to give a bit more life to the shot. The other thing you could do, if you did have a tripod, I don't know if you did have a tripod at the time, but if you did have a tripod, is put the camera on a tripod, put a thick ND filter on the camera and smooth out that water a little bit. That sometimes makes the image look a little bit different, and that's one good thing to do. Get a strong ND, like a 10-stop ND, to flatten out the water, and it'll blur the clouds a little bit, and it'll just make it look a bit different. And also, there's some people down here on the beach. If you use an ND filter and take a long exposure, you can get rid of those people. I'm guessing as you're at 1/60th of a second, using a 16mm, I'm guessing you probably shot this handheld. Could be wrong, but I'm guessing from that shutter speed that you were shooting handheld, so you didn't want to drop it too much so you didn't get any blur in the shot. Now with a 10-stop ND, you'd be able to drop your shutter speed from 1/60th of a second to 15 seconds. So you'd be able to really smooth out the water, and if the clouds are moving at all, you'd blur those a little bit. But the main thing is you'd get rid of all of the people. So you can see a load of people up on the walkway up here. You'd probably blur them out quite a bit, and the people walking on the beach, you'd get rid of them as well. But yeah, I love this location. Fantastic location and fantastic coastline. If you're ever in England, go and visit the Jurassic Coast. There's so many different photographic opportunities on that coastline. This next shot is by Damien. Thanks very much for sending it in. One thing I'd say about this is the time of day that you've taken the shot. If you watched my video on the International Landscape Photographer of the Year 2020, have a look at the photos that all of those landscape photographers have taken, and a lot of them are either first thing in the morning or last thing at night. Looking at the EXIF data, you took this at 12 minutes to 10 in the morning, so the sun is really high up in the sky, and you can see it up here. We've got some nice colour in the valley, but it does produce quite a flat light. One other thing is the framing. Now the horizon is not quite in the middle, and it's not quite on that bottom third. So if I go over to develop and put that up. Now this isn't a firm and fast rule, but it's one of those rules that's worth learning so you know when to use it and you know when to break it. But if you put that horizon on that bottom third, then most of the emphasis would be on the sky. However, the sky isn't that interesting in this shot, and it's quite blown out. So you'd almost want to tip your camera down and put the horizon on this top third. Then you'd have this interesting strip of sky. You wouldn't have the sun in, and you wouldn't have all of this whiteness at the top. You'd have more of the valley in the shot and what looks like probably part of the cliff that you're standing on in the shot as well. So you'd either tip it down or even kind of zoom in on the shot. or even get closer in on the shot by using a telephoto lens. So if I was to put that on the top, so imagine I'm just using a telephoto lens with this. Straight away, 2/3 of the shot is now taken up by the landscape and only 1/3 by the sky. These bits are a bit distracting down here. And this is what I mean. If you used that original focal length, but then tipped your camera down, you might get some interesting bits on the cliff that you're stood on, as well as that winding river into the valley. So go there at a different time of the day, either sunrise or sunset, and then think about your framing and think about the composition. Get the rule of thirds grid on the back of your camera and then see if you can line it up. If the sky's not very interesting, tip it down and get the horizon on that top level. If the sky's really interesting, tip it up and get that line on the bottom thirds level. Now, just looking at the stats, you shot this on the A7R Mark III and the 16-35 at 16. Now you're at f2.8 at 1/4000th of a second. So the other tip I'd give you is to maybe close down the aperture a bit, because you don't need to be shooting with f2.8. It's pushed the shutter speed all the way to 1/4000th of a second. So you don't need to be at such extremes. If you bring that aperture to say f8, it will control the shutter speed a bit more, and at f8 you'll get a much sharper image. This next shot by Janssen, it's a really nice close-up of a bird. My knowledge of what bird is what is pretty rubbish, so I'm not sure what bird this is. Is it a woodpecker? I could be completely wrong. Maybe a woodpecker with that spiky beak. Now you're probably laughing at me because I'm probably showing my absolute ignorance when it comes to birds. So this is taken with the A7C, so you've got yourself one of the new cameras. Focusing has worked quite well. It's with a 28-200 at 200. So I'm guessing you've used the 28-200 from Tamron, but you didn't quite get the reach on it. So looking at the focal length 35mm equivalent of 300, you've used the crop mode. And that would figure with the dimensions of 3215 by 2408. Now this is one of the really good things with that crop mode is you can get a bit closer, but the problem is it does drop your resolution. So that's when it's worth getting a longer focal length. One thing I would say about the composition is that the bird is kind of bunched up a little bit to the left-hand side. There's a lot of space behind the bird. Now there is a rule that people tend to stick to when they're taking photographs of animals and of people, and it's to give the subject looking space. Where this bird is at the moment is kind of squashed up to the left-hand side a little bit, and this leaf is a little bit annoying. Obviously you can't do anything about the leaf without disturbing the bird, but you could frame it up a little bit and put him almost to the right hand side of the frame, and then he's looking into the shot, giving more space, and it just feels a bit more comfortable. But you've got a good exposure with the bird and you've got the focus spot on, so that's really great. And with being at that end of the focal length, it really does knock the background out of focus. What happened? So you're at f5.6, ISO 1250 and 1/800th of a second. Now this next shot by Matt is of a reservoir. We've got the dam in front of the reservoir and it's one of the towers on that dam. It's really nice how you've used the trees to frame the subject, and there's no getting around. That subject is that pillar on the dam. The only thing I could say about this one is maybe if you shot it later in the day, because looking at the stats, you shot it at 20-2 in the afternoon. And then maybe if you had it, use a longer focal length and then maybe still use these trees to frame it up, but get it closer so that subject is filling the frame a little bit more. But it's really nice. It kind of shows the British countryside. I'm guessing you're in the UK. If not, let me know in the comments below where you did take this one, but I'm guessing it's in the UK. But yeah, really nice shot, framed up with the trees, and you can tell exactly what the subject is in this shot. So this next shot by Ingaj shows what I mean by looking space. You've got the bird scratching his neck, and then you've got all of this space in front of the bird. Shot at a really shallow depth of focus. Unfortunately, your EXIF data hasn't come through, but I'm guessing you've shot this at a really wide aperture. I'm guessing because that background is so out of focus, this could be shot with something like a 200mm prime, or maybe at the 200 end of a 70-200 at f2.8, but it is shot with a really wide aperture. It's really nice though. You've got low down and you've got this greenery in the foreground and also all of that greenery in the background. And again, I know exactly what the subject is. So if we go back to Janssen's shot, the bird is squashed up against the side, and that's what I was talking about, that looking room, having that space for the animal or the person to look into. And Ingars has done this perfectly here. If we get the rule of thirds up, boom, the eye is pretty much on that intersection there. The only thing I'd probably say about this is maybe you could use a smaller aperture to get this foreground and the background, get a bit more detail in it. But I really do like this one, and the bird just pops out of the shot at you. This next shot is by Vikash, and it's of a staircase going up into what looks like a dome of a building. Looks like you've dropped the saturation right down, so we've gone into a monochrome image, and it's on the A7 Mark III 28-75, so the Tamron lens at 28mm. Now I like this because the staircase kind of leads your eye into the shot. What I would try is maybe rotating the camera by 90 degrees. Because you've got all this negative space here, at the bottom the staircase is truncated by the edge of the frame. So in rotating that camera by 90 degrees, you're getting rid of this negative space on the side, but you're including the bottom of the staircase in the frame. I can see what you've done though. You've put the circle bang in the center of the shot. You could still do that, rotate it by 90 degrees and see what you get. So if you can go back to this location, take another shot where it is rotated by 90 degrees to try and get the bottom of the staircase in the shot. I do like shots like this of different perspectives where you're looking straight up or you're looking straight down. Obviously in this case, looking straight up. But yeah, if you get all of that staircase in the shot, that would make it spot on. So Jez, you kind of broke the rules a little bit and sent in 2 images, but the 2 images that you actually sent in, I can kind of talk about a few things in them. So I'm going to use them both together. Now this one is of a seascape, and you've deleted all your EXIF data as well, so I haven't got any of that, but it's of probably a sunset. Could be a sunrise if you're on an East Coast, but I'm guessing it's a sunset. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. But anyway, it's in the golden hour, and even though it's a beautiful sunset, you've got the nice yellows and oranges in the sky, because there's not much cloud in the sky and that cloud is on the horizon, it doesn't make the sky look interesting. So that's the thing with these big blue skies. It looks really nice and it feels really nice to be out in it, but when you actually take a photograph of it, it doesn't look that good. Now, if we look at your next photo, this is very different. Got lots of clouds, wispy clouds and things like that, and the sun is poking through. This sky is more interesting than that last one. When it comes to the foreground, you've got all of these rocks, but the rocks look a bit of a mess. So I'd say next time you're at this location, look for a specific set of rocks. You might get 3 of the same rocks in a row, or you might get a pool, or let's have a look to see if there's anything. Or even if you went down here to the left, you might find that there's a row of rocks that you can almost use as a leading line in the shot. So for instance, if you went with this one, again, these lines are kind of pointing to the left. I think this is quite a small, yeah, this is a tiny little image. But again, with this one, if you found a line of rocks or you found a feature of those rocks, which kind of gave you a leading line into the shot, that's when it'd be quite interesting. I'm guessing by the colors of this second one, did you take this on a phone? The colors look a bit off. I'm guessing with the size of the image and with the colors, might have been taken on a phone. If it's not taken on a phone, I'd dial the amount of editing back a little bit. You've got this big yellow patch in the middle, and then up here, the blues have gone more to, it's not magenta, but they've gone to that kind of strange looking blue color. And then you've got these red wispy bits around the clouds. The colors just look a bit unnatural. So if you did edit this, dial those colors back a little bit. And also for the foreground, look for something that will either have a leading line in it, or if there's 3 or 4 rocks you can find in a row, anything like that, that adds to the photo. So think about watching your foreground and really hunt around. Even if you went for a walk in the daytime, to find places in this location that might work as a foreground, and then you come back at the sunset knowing exactly where you're going to go. But yeah, it's a beautiful sunset. I love just going down to the beach and watching sunsets like this. I've got so many photos of clear skies like this that I haven't shared with anyone, but they really, it's weird. You get a beautiful sunset and it doesn't come across in the photo. This next shot by Karanvir, again I apologize if I've pronounced that badly. This is of a couple in front of a cityscape. Really nice location. It looks like your light is coming just off camera right, and it looks quite a direct flash. Looking at the catch light in the lady's eyes, looks quite a small flash. So one thing I'd say with this is maybe try and get the angle of flash a bit further around and see if you've got a softbox, because you can see the shadow underneath her chin as well. It's quite a hard light. Or if you were using a softbox already, try using a bigger softbox. It's a nice composition. You've got this couple stood to the right and you've got the city in the background, so you know exactly who the people are and where they're at. But yeah, all I'd say with this one is just use a slightly softer light or use a bigger softbox. Like for instance, I'm using a 90 centimeter softbox. So if you could get that on your flash, get the flash as close to them as possible, and the light will be a lot softer. It'd be interesting actually, let me know in the comments below what you were using on your flash, whether you were just using a flash head. It looks like you may have had some kind of softbox on there, but it'd be interesting to know the size of softbox if you were using one. As for the exposure, they're exposed really well and you've underexposed the city, so they really do stand out. This next shot is by Lance. Lance, thanks very much for sending it in. So this is of an ancient carving on a stone surrounded by foliage. Got nice bright red colours on this tree or small plant in the background, the greenery around the front of it. It does look cloudy and the sky doesn't have much detail in it. You've taken it with the A7R Mark III and the 24mm at f8, 1/125th of a second, ISO 100. Now if you look at the histogram, this bit on the right hand side, that's all of this white on the sky. So the sky's completely blown out. And this is the thing with shooting on those cloudy days. Those cloudy days are really good for people's faces, like I showed you earlier with the father and what I think is his son. Gives a really nice soft complementary light on a person's face. But with something like this, especially when you've got that much sky in the shot, it makes the shot look a bit flat. And also with the light on the subject, it's really hard to get a shot like this looking good when it is overcast. So one thing I would say is come back on a day where you've got the sun coming out or where the sun is hitting the subject, and you'll be amazed at how different it will look. The other thing you could do is get down really low and just have this stone carving as the whole subject, filling the whole shot. So what you want to do is walk around the subject and take lots of different shots of that subject and see which one afterwards on the computer looks best, or even look on the back of your camera to see which one looks best. The other thing you could have done with this is maybe bracket the shots, so then you've got more detail in the sky and you can bring that detail back, or underexpose the foreground to again get that detail in the background, and then when you're editing you bring that underexposed foreground back up. This next one by Ruben is of a busy street, and it looks quite a foggy street as well. I'm just looking at your EXIF data. You are shooting with the X-T4 at 16mm, which is the full frame equivalent of 24mm. So looking at your settings, it's at ISO 1600, you're at f22 at 2.1 seconds. What I would do with this shot is wait for those people to move, and then I would drop my ISO. I'd bring my aperture down to f16. I try not to shoot much smaller apertures than f16, because at f22 you do get diffraction and it does soften the image a little bit. And if we zoom in on the shot, it is quite noisy and it is quite hazy. And some of that haze will obviously be because of the fog and the mist, but some of that haze is probably due to diffraction as well, shooting at f22. What I'd probably do is drop my ISO down to 100. I'd bring my aperture down to f16, and then I'd still be able to get a 5-second exposure. And that would be easily attainable if you're shooting from a tripod. And then these light streaks would be a lot longer. Another thing you could do with this is get your camera lower So you're looking at it at a different perspective. This looks like it's from eye level. When you do change your perspective and when you drop the camera down at sort of foot level, it really does change the image, and you'd probably get these light streaks coming out and to the side of the frame, and that would really change the shot, and that would get rid of these kind of ugly patches on the road because it would be so low. And then you might be able to get this light that's just out of frame back into the frame as well. Sorry, that was a bit rambly, but yeah, just keep an eye on those settings. The lower the ISO, the cleaner the shot to a certain extent. You don't want to shoot with an aperture of f22 too much because you do get diffraction and the image will be a little bit softer. So try and keep it to f16 as the smallest aperture that you'd use. And then with that shot, to get the light streaks even longer, lengthen that shutter speed. Now this next one is from Jason, and I really like this one. You've got a single point perspective. You're not shooting at too small an aperture so we can see what's going on in the background. And it looks kind of a grungy place that this person's at. And they're just chilling out, listening to music on their headphones, kind of ignoring that grungy, rough looking building in the background. Person's side lit from the left as well, so that's giving nice detail in the person's face. It does look like you put a vignette on the shot. So there's like a reverse vignette, like a white vignette. So you've got this haze around. Could be wrong, but yeah, it looks like, because I can see it on the person as well. But yeah, it's really nice the way these lines are all leading up to her face, and this one's coming down. One thing I might change with this would be to try and get that person's head a little bit higher in the frame, because if we look at this, she's not quite center, and then also that single point perspective. So if you watch The Shining, which is Stanley Kubrick's film, he loves and he always has single point perspective. Well, he doesn't always have, but in a lot of his shots, he has that single point perspective. But he has that point bang in the middle, and he has everything completely symmetrical. So if you were just to move over to your left a little bit, have the model doing exactly as they're doing in the shot, but get them a little bit higher so their face is perfectly in the middle, but then all of those lines are coming perfectly to that person's face, that would really add to this shot. But it's a really cool shot. I really like this one. It's kind of quirky and it's quite different to everything else that we've seen. But yeah, nice lighting on the person's face. Nice use of the aperture, so you're not going too wide an aperture to completely blow the background out, so we can see where the person's at. And also looking at the stats, you took this with the A7 III, with a 50mm f1.8, so you could have taken that aperture right down to 1.8, but you chose not to. So that's good that you made that decision. It is still blurry, but not quite as blurry as it would be if you were shooting at f1.8. That would really blow the background out. You'd almost not be able to see what was behind the person. And then that would kind of take away from the shot. So thank you once again for sending in your photographs. I hope I've given you something to work with to help you improve your photography. And if you didn't send your photos in, or if I didn't review your specific image, I hope you still got something out of this. Now let me know what you think in the comments below. It'll be great to hear your thoughts. And if you want to learn more about photography, click on this video next. And if you want to binge watch a load of tutorials, click on this one down here. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for weekly tutorials in photography and videography. I'll see you next time.